Welcome to FreakWorld. The midnight hour is approaching, and an eerie quiet begins to settle on the city. The spasms and wheezing of the town sputter out into an ominous, suffocating silence. The darkness envelops us all as the moon slithers up to its seat at the crown of our blotted sky. Turn down your lights, lock the door, and keep your head on a swivel. It's time to hear some freaky stories.
I listen to a true crime podcast about myself. Every night on my walk home from work, I listen to true crime podcasts. Even though my favorite podcast already released their episode for this week, the app said there was a new one. Excited, I hit play. It was a small town, the kind that still has mom and pop shops lining the street, the kind where everyone knows your name. But little did the residents know that they would soon be rocked by a horrible crime. I stopped at a traffic light. The red glowed in the darkness, glinting off the wet street. A black SUV sloshed by. Across from me, eerie blue refrigerator lights glowed from inside a corner deli. The chairs all up on their tables, feet in the air. The signal turned to walk. That chilly September evening was no different for the young student. She'd left her shift at the local store and walked back home, except she never made it home. Young student. Local store. Damn, this was hitting close to home. I was a part-time student at Franklin Community College, and worked at the local convenience store. And, of course, I was walking home. I glanced behind me, looking at the alleyway behind Alessandro's Pizza, which was dark except for the neon light spilling from the sign. Her boyfriend reported her missing the next day. The town conducted a volunteer-led search, and after 2 days, they found something. Dread formed in my stomach, anticipating a body. But what he said next was so much worse. Washed up on the shore of Worthington Lake, they found a pair of size 9 red Converse sneakers. I stopped and looked down at my red Converse sneakers, damp from the rain. What the hell? My heart began to pound. The shoes were sent to a forensic analyst, who would compare its wear pattern to another pair of her shoes to try and determine if they belonged to the victim. A rumbling sound made me jump. I turned to see a dark SUV turning left at the intersection. Didn't I see that car a few minutes ago? Maybe it's following me, and the car passed me and disappeared into the darkness. Come on, Sarah. Get a grip. Converse are popular sneakers. A little out of fashion, but still. 9 is a common women's shoe size. And what college student doesn't have some sort of a job? What, you think you're listening to some sort of prophecy of your own death? Yeah, right. After a few weeks, the results came back. The analyst was certain. The shoes belonged to none other than Sarah Campbell. The blood drained from my face. Sarah Campbell. My name. What the fuck? How? I didn't have time to think. I forced myself to move. I broke into a run. The small shops turned into a colorful blur. Searching the lake came up empty. Without a body, a crime is hard to solve. But police didn't give up. And finally, a witness came forward. Someone had seen a car parked at the lake that night, around 2 a.m. A black SUV with darkened windows. No. What the hell is going on? I whipped around. The street was empty. No people, no cars. No witnesses, said the little voice in the back of my mind, the one that's watched way too many true crime shows. My eyes scanned the shops. All closed. There were 6 black SUVs matching the witness's description in the Franklin area. But one of them, in particular, caught Detective Nolan's eye. It belonged to John Kelly, a registered sex offender. VRRRM. The sound was so soft I almost didn't hear it over the voice of the podcast. I whipped around and there it was. 2 blaring white headlights behind me. Coming from a black SUV. I forced my legs to pump faster. The car didn't speed up, it crawled along, slowly, taking its time. Like the driver knew he could catch me, no matter what. I glanced back, trying to make him out behind the darkened windshield, but the headlights were too bright to see anything. Kelly wasn't just a registered sex offender. He'd been convicted of assaulting a woman he worked with, who had multiple piercings and short dark hair, just like Sarah. The car crawled down the road, stalking me, like a lioness stalks her prey. I veered left, onto our dark residential street. Just a few more steps. Headlights flashed across me, illuminating my running shadow on the pavement. I didn't look back. I just ran, as fast as I possibly could. The little brown house with the yellow shutters came into view. I sprinted across the grass, grabbing my keys from my pocket. Click. I threw the door open and slammed it shut behind me. Then I turned the deadbolt, collapsed against the door, and began crying. I heard the rush of the car passing our house, continuing down the road. But I wasn't safe. Gabe wasn't home yet. I was alone, in a dark house, with someone driving down the street who knew exactly where I lived. Still sobbing, I checked all the locks. Then I called Gabe, who assured me he was 5 minutes away. I made my way down the dark hallway and headed into the bathroom. Then I set my phone on the counter, grabbed a clump of tissues, and began to blow my nose. Click. I jumped. Whipped around. But it wasn't coming from outside the door. My phone screen lit up. The podcast was still playing. I must have hit it when I put the phone down. It had skipped several minutes forward, according to the play indicator. "What do you think happened to Sarah?" the baritone voice asked. I reached for it, to turn it off. "Well, she'd told me she wanted to run away before." I stopped dead. It was Gabe's voice. Clear as day, coming from the speakers. "She did? Why?" the voice asked. "She wasn't happy with her grades, her job, her parents. She told me sometimes she'd dream of just moving to some random state and leaving it all behind." I froze, staring at the mirror. "I never said that. Never." Gabe was lying? "I mean, that was hurtful to me as her boyfriend, you know? I thought we were going to get married someday. But apparently she didn't feel the same way." My heart pounded in my ears. "So you think she just skipped town, and is happily living her life out somewhere else? Rather than being abducted or murdered?" A pause. "Yes. That's exactly what I think. That's all for now. Thank you to our listeners." The outro played. I stared at my reflection, everything coming down all at once, my mind trying to race and catch up with what it meant. The front door creaked open. Footsteps sounded outside. "Sarah. I'm back." I backed away from the door. "Sarah." My eyes fell on the window. I ran over to it, turned the lock. Push. I popped the screen out. Then I swung a leg over, pulled myself through the window, and ran as fast as I could. I found an old childhood photo. There's something terribly wrong with it. I found it while cleaning out the closet. An old photo, creased at the corners. It depicted a little boy sitting on a chair in the middle of a wallpapered kitchen. Blue eyes, blonde hair. I flipped it over and checked the date on the back. November 14, 1996. So me, when I was 4. Except the kid didn't look quite like me. The photo was grainy, so it was hard to tell for sure. But the eyes were a little too wide set. The smile was too toothy. So, a friend? But it was definitely my mom's kitchen. Floral wallpaper with pink rosettes, the old oak table. And the kid so closely resembled me, wouldn't I remember having a friend that looked like he could be my twin brother? And why isn't it with the other family photos? I'd found it in Mom's closet. She had several photo books, all populated with childhood photos, documenting the most insignificant events, from baking cookies to baseball games. So why wasn't this photo with the rest? Why was it hiding on the top shelf of my mom's closet, tucked under a hat box? I walked out into the family room, grabbed the photo album labeled 1995 to 1998. Paged through it until I got to a good, clear photo of myself at 4. Then I pulled the photo from my pocket and compared the two. It wasn't a great comparison. My head was tilted to the side, and his was straight. I was wearing a hat, he wasn't. Still, the difference was unmistakable. His grin was wider, toothier. His skin was paler. His eyes were wider set. Yet, the differences were subtle. To anyone but me, they'd probably look like the same person. "What are you doing?" I turned to see my mom, standing in the doorway, carrying a large box. I hesitated, wondering if I should bring it up to her. She had enough on her mind, with my stepdad passing away and the big move. "I found this photo." "Who is that?" She set the box down and walked over. "That's you. When you were 4 or 5. She smiled. "Ah, how sweet. Look at you." "But it doesn't." I hesitated again, knowing I would sound crazy. "It doesn't, look exactly like me, does it?" "Yeah, you were a goofy-looking kid." She laughed. "You got a lot better looking as you aged." "No, I mean, that photo doesn't look like I did when I was a kid." "Look, see." I held up the photo of me in the Red Sox cap side by side with the photo of the boy in the kitchen. "I think they look identical," she said. "No, they don't. Maybe it's the hat." "Hey, can you help me in the attic? There's a lot of stuff up there." "Sure. I'll be there in a second." She smiled at me and turned away. I listened to her bare footsteps recede on the carpet. Then I snapped the photo album shut and put it back. I tucked the photo in my pocket. Then I walked back into my mom's room and opened the closet. There were more. When I took down the hat box to search under it, the top came off revealing an entire trove of photographs. I picked up a few of them and my heart dropped. A kid hunched over a birthday cake with 4 candles, smiling. Me. Except, not me. The same toothy grin, the same wide-set blue eyes. A kid standing in the front yard, pointing to a frog. My front yard. Again, not me. And then there was a photo that made my heart stop. A photo of my bed. I still remembered those covers, with the sports cars on them. The pillow with the wheel on it. The car lamp. But there, sitting on the bed. Not one little boy. 2. "Adam," my mom's voice came from above. I stared at the photo, frozen. Me, sitting next to a little boy that looked almost exactly like me. A twin? A brother? I had no memory of this kid. All my life, I'd believed I was an only child. Adam. The stack of photos was a few inches thick. There was no way I could go through them all. I slipped several in my pocket, replaced the hat box, and then headed down the hall. "Coming, Mom." I started up the ladder. And my phone began to ring. The theme to Legend of Zelda played its tune. I stopped 2 stairs up and slipped the phone out of my pocket. Caller ID. Allie. My wife. Yeah. "Can you get me a drink, too?" Sure," I said. What do you want me to pick up on the way back? The usual whiskey. On the way back? Yeah. On the way back from my mom's. I'll be here another hour or two, but... You're at your mom's? She asked. Her voice suddenly soft, confused. Yeah, why? I don't understand. I just let you inside the house, she said. You're down in the kitchen. Making us drinks. Aren't you? Here's what really happens when we die. Hello Earth. I'm writing this today because it feels wrong not to share it. I decided to tell you, internet strangers, because the world deserves to know what really happens when we die. I'm sure you have a lot of questions and you're probably wondering how I'm writing this, or why I'm conscious. I will explain everything, but first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Stephen Sterling. I'm 46 years old. I have terminal lung cancer. Inoperable. That's probably the result of my heavy smoking habit. Just stay away from cigarettes. I will probably be dead tomorrow. No, I'm not dead right now, in case you were wondering. I just know what comes after tomorrow for me. I had been afraid of death before I found out what it's like. When I first got diagnosed, I was told that I had 3 months to live. It's the maximum, according to several doctors. That means I will be dead on January 25, 2022. I hope I have enough time to at least finish this story. During those 3 months, I lived in fear every day, and did they go by fast. I couldn't stop thinking about what happens when we die. It was unbearable. I was just waiting for that day to finally come, without actually trying to do anything a dying person would. Now, 3 months have almost passed and I wasted every single day doing nothing. I looked at the calendar in my room today, the date was January 24th. I will most likely not make it through the night. I was lying on my bed, looking at the ceiling. I had never noticed that small crack near the chandelier. While trying to remember when was the last time I even looked up in my house, I heard a knock at the door. I was extremely confused because no one had knocked on that door for over 20 years. I was sure it was a mistake, so I continued thinking about that unimportant crack on the ceiling. Knock knock knock. I let out a sigh. I really wasn't in the mood for free samples of whatever the fuck they were selling. Although, I was wrong. When I opened the door, no one was selling anything. It was my friend Larry. My only friend. He had found out about my situation, and came to visit me. Larry. I said. He looked at me. He seemed so happy to see me. Unusually happy. Then, he hugged me. Even though it was only a hug, I had never felt more loved. We got inside and I made us a cup of tea. How did you? I asked the question partly, but he understood. Oh, I talked to your mother. He answered and took the first sip of his tea. Yeah, I guess I should give her a call too, it's been a long time. I said. I reached over to grab my phone when he stopped me. You know, I'm kinda in a rush, why not talk to your mother later? He calmly replied and took another sip of his tea. You're right. Sorry about that, it was rude. I answered. After a few minutes of silence, Larry decided to finally say something. I'm really sorry about that, Steve. Thank you. I generically replied. Have you ever wondered what happens after? He said all of a sudden. I looked at him. He was sipping his tea while looking at me. What happens after what? I asked even though I knew what he meant. What do you think happens when we die, Steve? Silence. What a question to ask a dying person, I was thinking. I don't know. Eternal nothingness. Infinite blackness, endless void. Whatever you call it, that's what happens. I said angrily. He chuckled and took yet another sip. If you had the chance to know, before it happens, would you take it? I didn't respond. I looked at my cup of tea on the table. It was still full. I hate tea. I looked around. I looked at the old clock in the living room. It's sad how it'll live longer than most of us. I looked out the window. Children were playing outside. They will die too. I tried looking at the sun. It will eventually explode. I looked at the calendar on the wall. One day until the party. I wanted to cry it all out. I wanted Larry to leave. I wanted to be alone until my eternity. That feeling of fear struck me again. What's the meaning of it all? Why me? What comes after? So many questions, and yet, so little answers. Yet, I would take the chance. I finally replied. I want to know what happens after death, Larry. I said in a quavering voice. Then, he smiled. Look out the window. I was confused, again. What do you mean, Larry? I asked. Just turn around. He said while still smiling. I turned around. I looked through the same window, but there weren't any kids. There was no sun. It was the universe. I walked to the window, purple and black colors along with sparkling stars and asteroids. Everywhere. I felt a strong urge to go out and explore all of it. Another strange thing was, I didn't feel shocked or confused. It seemed like a promised land, nothing strange, nothing unreal. I kept staring at the beautiful flow of matter. Words can't describe it. Larry, is this what it's like? I turned around. Larry was still there, still smiling. Yeah, but it's not completely the same. He replied and took the last sip of his tea. It's not the same, because you will no longer need to carry that flawed body around. He stood up and smiled again. I chose to say goodbye. I won't be here for long. I was a little confused. Don't worry. You'll understand soon. Until then, remember, possibilities are endless, not the void. I smiled too. I watched Larry leave my house. I turned around, just to look at the world from that unique perspective one more time, but it was gone. The children were back. The sun was back. Everything went back to normal. Was that all just a dream? I was thinking. I looked at Larry's empty cup with a tea bag in it and smiled again. It wasn't a dream. I would never drink a cup of tea. I'm also not scared of death anymore. Now, when I know what it's like, what am I supposed to be afraid of? After several minutes of processing everything, the phone rang. It was my mom. Strange. She rarely calls. I picked up. I listened to my mother for about 15 seconds, and then dropped the phone on the ground. She had news, and turns out that Larry Smith died in a car accident 2 days ago. Did I just talk to a dead person? I was thinking. No, that's not possible. Did Larry even come? That must have been a dream. Then I looked at his cup again. I screamed. I talked to a dead person. The same feeling of fear. I felt it yet again. Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! I was yelling on the floor, looking at the ceiling. Looking at the crack. Then, I moved my head to the left. Ready to fall asleep, exhausted from all the screaming. But before I closed my eyes, I was able to see through the window one more time, and it was back. The universe. I got up immediately and walked to the window. I put my hand on the glass. I definitely wasn't dreaming. That was real, and that's what comes after. I was thinking about Larry and everything he had told me. He was out there. Somewhere. I felt happy that he decided to visit his old friend during his final return to Earth. I, too, will soon be able to step outside the borders and break the limits of our bodies. I'm about to explore every star, every galaxy, every planet, without anything pulling me behind. Who knows, maybe there's something beyond the universe itself, something that our, again limited, brains can't even imagine nor comprehend. I wish I could share every adventure of mine, after tomorrow, but that's a journey everyone has to experience on their own. Until we all meet again, I guess I should say goodbye, Earth. I stayed on the International Space Station and we were warned not to interact with crew members we didn't recognize. A couple of years ago I was assigned to stay on the ISS for a period of time. I got through the training without any problems. It was exhausting, but I knew that the end goal was getting to spend some time in space. I was going up with 2 other astronauts who had previously spent time aboard the ISS. They had helped me in my training and I considered them friends by this point. We had everything important that was said. The person leading the meeting turned to me and started telling me that there was something that I had to be careful about. I was confused at first as to what he meant. He began to explain that there will be 7 of us up there aboard the station, while showing us the pictures of the 4 other crew. He warned me that these are the only people that I should acknowledge while on the station. I shouldn't talk to anyone else, and if I hear someone outside the station begging to be let in, then I should quickly do a head count before opening any hatches. I stood there with my mouth hanging open as the meeting continued on. I laughed to myself after a few minutes as I thought that he had just got me with an epic prank. The flight to the station was uneventful and I was proud of myself for actually making it into space. I knew that my father would have been proud of me as he had always supported my dreams. I quickly got to know everyone on the station as we were in very close quarters. I remember gazing down at Earth and was shocked at how beautiful it looked. This was the greatest moment of my entire life. I woke up the next morning and immediately started prepping the equipment I would need for the day. I moved to one of the main corridors and instantly froze as I gazed at the man standing there. His eyes were blacker than anything I had ever seen before and they seemed to somehow glow. He smiled at me and the flesh on his face ripped open so that his smile went from one side of his face to the other. His teeth were bright red and they appeared to have faces of people screaming in agony. I floated there for a few moments while watching him somehow stand perfectly still. One of the other crew came by and told me to stop staring at him and move away. I quickly came to my senses and floated away as quickly as I could. I could feel his eyes peering at me as I moved away. The other crew members told me not to look at them and just to pretend like they didn't exist. The next morning I woke up and froze in terror as there were now 2 of these creatures on board and they were beginning to follow me about. Anytime I turned around they would be right behind me smiling away. Their flesh had begun to rot and I could see their insides were full of a black slithering mass. I spent the rest of my time on the station desperately counting the time down before I could leave. The creatures had multiplied and they wouldn't leave me alone. I couldn't even look down at Earth anymore as there would always be one of them looking in at me. I was ecstatic when it was time to leave as I could finally get away from whatever the fuck was up here. The creatures seemed to look sad as I prepared to leave and they began to wave at me as I climbed aboard the shuttle. Their bodies were now so rotted that only the bones remained. I wept tears of joy as I finally set foot on Earth again and swore to myself that I would never go back to space. If any of you ever have to go to the International Space Station, then don't look at someone who isn't one of the crew members.